Broken Elm Street had the kind of quiet that swallowed sound. A single row of aging maples, mailboxes that leaned like sleepy old men, and houses that held more memories than light. 35 years ago, the street was already ancient in the eyes of the few who had grown up there. The neighborhood watched as the Daniels family arrived in the summer of 1990, Claire Daniels, Henry Daniels, and their newborn triplets, Anna, Beth, and Carl. The two-story Victorian at the corner of Elm and Marigold became home. Neighbors greeted Claire with casseroles, offered to babysit, praised Henry's steady work ethic. Everything looked ordinary, but underneath, something began to shift. Within months of moving in, murmurs began. There were late-night arguments, Claire shutting her curtains tight, Henry coming home later than he'd ever done. One neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, said she sometimes heard crying in the night, not infants, but something more anguished, muffled. Another saw a dark van parked near house number 17, no plates, no lights. Some nights the streetlights flickered, power surges blamed, but only certain houses seemed affected. On August 12, 1990, a storm knocked out the power. When it returned the next morning, Claire and the babies had vanished. Henry claimed that there'd been a break-in, that he fled with them in terror, once masked figures forced entry. But the scene didn't align. 3 infant car seats remained in the driveway. A crib stood empty in the nursery with its blanket folded oddly. Claire's wallet was found in the house. Henry's explanation unraveled under scrutiny, but in the absence of clear evidence, many in town hesitated to condemn him. Grief mixed with suspicion, rumor with dread. Broken Elm Street changed. Neighbors stopped waving at the Daniels house. The porch light stayed lit all night. A small group of local mothers formed a vigil, lighting candles beneath the windows. The case went cold quickly. Police found no forced entry, no sign of outside perpetrators. Henry, crushed with loss and guilt, drifted into shadows, refusing interviews, declining help. Claire was never found. Neither were Anna, Beth, or Carl. Their disappearance became one of those unsolved absences a town carries, a wound that can't properly heal. Then came Mara Finch, private investigator, former reporter. She'd grown up in a nearby city and tracked cold cases for years. When she read a short article in 1995 about Broken Elm, 3 infants vanished, father alone, no leads. Something clicked. Finch believed in the persistence of small clues. She arrived with notebooks, tape recorder, steady hands. She interviewed Mrs. Alvarez, the teenager who saw the van, the electrician who fixed the flickering street lamp. She found inconsistencies. Henry's account of that night didn't match electric company records. Someone claimed to have seen Claire packing. Another said she looked frightened, not panicked. Still, it was mostly rumor and memory. Finch dug through old police reports, found that evidence had been stored poorly. The Daniels house was sold once, then abandoned, then boarded up. The photographs of Claire from back then showed a woman already weighed with worry. But no phone records, no forensic trace, no bodies. For many, the story settled into folklore. What happened to the triplets? They asked at supper tables, in grocery lines, and people wondered if the answer, if ever found, would be kind or cruel. Broken Elm Street, 35 years later, still bore that question. And Mara Finch, after 5 years of chasing shadows, had decided enough shadows had gathered. It was time to pry open the past properly. Mara Finch kept returning to Broken Elm like a detective, with a splinter lodged in her thumb. The pain small but persistent. Her notebooks filled with interviews. Mrs. Alvarez from across the street swore she heard soft crying the night before the Daniels vanished. A high school janitor remembered moving boxes in and out of a moving van at midnight. Most accounts were a patchwork of human error, memory bending under time's weight. Still, Finch trusted the small things. The shadow that looks wrong in a photograph, the offhand remark that lingers. In 1996, 6 years after the disappearance, a teenage boy digging a shallow foundation for a treehouse in the Adams property, 3 doors down, found a small rusted tin. Inside, 3 tiny knit booties yellowed but intact. The town ricocheted between hope and dread. Authorities reopened the case, took DNA swabs, exhumed a neighbor's pet cemetery, and examined old police reports that smelled faintly of mildew and cigarettes. The booties matched the timeline, patterns local crafters recognized, yarn used typical of infant garments in that period. Yet even with a physical token, the story refused to straighten into a single explanation. The booties could have been misplaced by a visiting relative or dropped during a move. For Henry Daniels, now gaunter, more haunted, the renewed attention was both welcome and terrifying. He spoke rarely, always circling back to an image. Claire humming to the babies in a soft light filtering through lace curtains. Finch wondered about the edges around Henry's life. He worked at a local warehouse on the outskirts. Rumors that contraband passed through whispered stories of closed-door deals. The Wood City gang, whose name had floated in alleyway gossip for years, surfaced in her investigations. Finch traced known members to the Railroad Lamp, a dim bar where whispered conversations slipped over the smell of cigarette smoke and stale beer. Transaction records, shipment receipts, hours that didn't align. Small pieces, still not a puzzle. Then, unexpectedly, a woman came forward after 30 years of silence. She introduced herself as June Walker, nurse's aide once stationed at St. Mary's Hospital. She said she treated Claire in the months before the disappearance. Walker claimed Claire had been afraid, of men who visited at odd hours, of a debt Henry would not or could not satisfy. Walker's testimony was explosive: financial distress, pressure, secret phone calls, tears in the hallway. It suggested a motive not of random abduction, but something internal, something escalating beyond family struggles. Police interviewed Walker but found inconsistencies. Her dates wavered, names were hazy. Finch believed parts of her story, but sensed Walker was protecting someone, or perhaps protecting herself. When pressed, Walker would say she didn't want to make it worse, that some things in Broken Elm are best left in soft shadow. Her reluctance added to the tangled narrative: fear, loyalty, silence. As Finch compiled her interviews, she mapped a lattice of relationships: neighbors who owed favors, loan sharks floating in the periphery, young men drifting in and out of union halls and warehouses. She found ledger entries hidden under floorboards, shipping manifests with mismatched addresses, phone records with burner lines. Each lead seemed small, innocent, but together they formed a pattern: pressure, debts, fear, unspoken threats. Still, the triplets remained lost, Claire's fate unknown, but the gap between rumor and responsibility was narrowing. Broken Elm had begun to shift. Candlelight vigils reappeared. Local reporters began asking hard questions. And Mara Finch, whose persistence was now public, knew the fight was no longer just to uncover, but to demand truth, no matter how painful. By 2002, Broken Elm had its first real shake. A retired cop, Dave Harlan, published a slender memoir of the town's darker corners, hinting that the Daniels case involved an arrangement gone wrong. The phrase outraged some, comforted others, but most importantly, it put pressure on institutions that had been content with their own silence. Mara Finch intensified her search. She got access to archived phone records, mapping the town's nervous geography. Patterns emerged: late-night calls from Henry Daniels' number to burner lines registered under aliases, particularly one linked to a man named Lyle Archer. Archer was loosely connected to Wood City. A bartender at the Railroad Lamp, Davies, described Archer as the kind of person who wore threats like a second skin. Finch subpoenaed shipping manifests, ledger entries, rental records. Often she found documents that were damaged, illegible, or missing, lost to time, or perhaps deliberately suppressed. Then came a small but pivotal discovery. In 2008, a developer property on the edge of Broken Elm unearthed a shallow grave while installing utility lines. Inside, animal bones, but also a scrap of synthetic fabric, a piece of what could have been infant clothing. Lab analysis compared the fiber to clothing distributed in 1990 among silk blend garments. The manufacturer still had distribution records. Finch followed the trail of the shipments. One crate was consigned to Henry's employer. The map of shipments, the logs of wage slips, the rumor of off-record overtime, all pointed to opportunity, if not intent. Finch's investigations began to unsettle more than just old memories. Some in the town resented her digging, accusing her of reopening wounds for attention, painting Henry as guilty despite no confessions, dragging family into public shame. Henry, older now, thinner, more shadowed, rarely spoke. but sometimes he'd leave notes slipped under Finch's door. Desperate. Raw. One read, "They say some things are meant to be forgotten." Another, "We didn't know how to bury them right." Finch suspected guilt, not necessarily criminal guilt, but guilt by association, by silence. Then a van rental receipt turned up behind a weather-worn painting in the Daniels house, rented under the name Harmon Logistics on the night of the disappearance. Harmon Logistics was a shell, a front company. The owner had prior convictions for fraud, but was never connected directly to violence. The receipt didn't name who drove the van, but it tied together several threads: rental logs, surveillance camera stills from nearby gas stations, plus a partial license plate that matched Holtzman family plates. Holtzman's had ties to the Wood City gang through business fronts. Reporter Theo Park entered the circle. Young, tenacious, he had a knack for tracking down local legends and turning them into leads. Finch and Park met in a diner, cold coffee between them. They laid timelines out across napkins, compared witness statements side by side, flagged contradictions. They discovered that certain community leaders had discouraged reporting rumors to police, that certain witnesses had been paid or silenced in ways small towns with no anonymity know too well. But as they prepared to escalate, they found markers of threat. Finch's car was defaced. 3 overlapping circles, symbol seen decades ago on the Daniels gate. A message. Men driving slowly past her motel. Phone calls at 2 a.m. when no one wanted to speak. Theo Park received an envelope of photographs. Claire Daniels in hospital, her eyes fearful. Date stamped just before the disappearance. None of the photos had provenance. They could be forgeries. Yet their power was in what they suggested. Someone wanted people remembering, but on their terms. Broken Elm was no longer a town with a past. It was a living contest over truth, between silence and confession, between the official story and the stories people dared to tell. And as the pressure built, Finch knew that sooner or later, Finch and Theo's collaboration became the thread that unraveled a lot of the town's carefully arranged fabric. Theo's articles, serialized in a regional newspaper, sharpened the community's attention. Readers called with tips, old and new. A former Wood City affiliate named Marcus Q. Quinlan, long estranged from gang life, reached out with trembling voice. Q said he saw a white van idling near the Daniels house the fateful night, and named a figure known only as Knox. Knox was a man of influence, a fixer whose reputation stretched across storefronts and back alleys. According to small-town recollections, Knox handled favors, threats, and unrecorded debts. Finch found ledger entries that named an address linked to Knox, shipment receipts that carried his company's name, but were delivered to P.O. boxes. Q helped locate a remote property Knox had once used. It was quiet now, overgrown. Finch searched it under warrant, feather-dusted wood, old drapes stained, signs of recent disturbance. She found crates, some empty, some with packing materials consistent with baby clothing, yarn, and synthetic fabrics. No bodies, no direct proof of the triplets. But the smell of truth gets strong in places long avoided. Then Marianne Daniels, Claire's sister, reappeared after decades away. She brought with her chest boxes, letters Claire wrote in secret, phone bills, photographs showing a truck with a logo matching Harmon Logistics near Elm and Marigold, voicemails where Henry's voice was wind-shaken. Marianne had kept these hoping one day someone would listen. She said Claire feared for her safety, had spoken to Walker, had asked Henry to hide letters. Her entrance into the case renewed local interest. Suddenly people saw what had been buried behind torn drapes and mumbled apologies. Marianne's memories were imperfect, but they were her own. Finch asked cold case units to re-examine everything: DNA, fiber samples, fingerprints. Technology had advanced. Labs analyzed a piece of tape taken from a municipal trash compactor on Elm, sealed years ago under law. The adhesive tape had a partial DNA profile, matching neither Claire nor Henry, but matching a man with assault convictions from decades before, connected to Wood City. Finch identified him via old arrest records. He was alive but evasive. As arrests neared, the town's undercurrents roared. A local pastor held prayer vigils by house number 17. Neighbors placed candles in windows. But fear persisted. Anonymous threats were emailed to Finch. Her motel room was searched by someone in the night. Theo Park's family reported strangers watching their house. Someone smashed Finch's mailbox. The symbols, 3 overlapping circles, again. Finch slept lightly. Theo steeled himself. They knew that going public meant danger. The legal gears began to move. Prosecutors assembled a mosaic: the van rental under Harmon Logistics, Marianne's testimonial image, the partial DNA, the matching fabric shipments, Q's eyewitness. They filed for arrest warrants. The first arrest was unceremonious but electric in the town's collective breath. Raymond Knox Mercer, old now, less composed, driven from his calm intersections to a police cruiser. Flashing cameras, neighbors staring. Maybe this was the moment where rumor tipped into accountability. But even as Knox was cuffed, the story refused closure. Knox claimed he was elsewhere. Defense lawyers attacked witness credibility. They found gaps and inconsistencies in memories. Labs warned partial DNA wasn't a full match. Some evidence chain was broken. Finch watched the courtroom as a place that demands absolutes, while what she had painstakingly gathered was ragged, overlapping, human. Broken Elm, now awakened, braced. The trial was imminent. Old loyalties, fear, pride, all were poised to clash. The triplets remained missing. Claire remained unaccounted for, but for the first time many believed that truth might finally have a shape. The trial was the kind of spectacle small towns avoid, but secretly crave. Jurors picked from the same neighborhoods where the Daniels had once lived, reporters in the pews, and legal teams rehearsing a drama that had been 35 years in the making. Finch and Theo sat in the courtroom, like two people holding a fragile map to a place many had stopped visiting. Prosecutors laid out a narrative of coercion and desperation. Henry Daniels had been deeply indebted, unable to sustain the demands placed on him by shadowy creditors. Harmon Logistics was presented not simply as a shell company, but a tool used by Knox and his associates to obscure transport of both goods and threats. The van rental records tied Knox to suspicious deliveries. Marianne's letters and phone logs painted Claire as fearful, trapped. Q's testimony placed Knox near the property, the partial DNA on the tape in the compactor linked to the assault record. Florence, a young woman who once worked at a textile warehouse that shipped those fabrics, confirmed shipments that matched what had been found at Knox-linked sites. Witnesses testified with trembling voices. Walker, June. Walker, though aging, recalled Claire's state, not frantic but resigned, as though something inevitable were pressing in. Mrs. Alvarez, the teenager who'd seen the van, swore to what she saw. Marianne described finding the booties, the letters, voicemails. Each added a layer. Prosecutors asked the jury to consider the pattern: silence, pressure, conflicting loyalties, fear, and the way small crimes accumulate into larger ones. The defense attacked each connection. They argued the DNA was partial, the matches approximate. They claimed the shipping records were circumstantial, no forensic evidence that any of the triplets were ever buried or harmed. They painted Finch and Theo as romantic investigators, weaving scattered stories into a narrative desirable for public consumption. They cast doubt on Q's reliability. Ex-gang members have motives. They pointed out that Henry Daniels had no convictions, that many witnesses' memories were decades old, filtered through grief and rumor. Outside, Broken Elm fractured into camps. Candlelight vigils persisted. Some residents held "Justice Now" signs. Others, "Respect the presumption of innocence." Older neighbors worried about bringing shame and unwanted attention. Younger ones pressed for answers. Local businesses saw tourists arrive, drawn by news stories. Some welcomed the attention, others resented the crowds. The Daniels house, a rundown shell, became a site of both pilgrimage and trespass. In the third week, a surprise witness took the stand. Lena Marks, a former employee of Harmon Logistics, who had quit after hearing rumors about what the company was doing. She testified seeing crates loaded into vans marked urgent, not manifesting in any record. She said one crate had been ripped open, baby clothing inside. Marks's testimony was challenged, but the detail, names, dates, descriptions, matched what Finch and Marianne had uncovered. It transformed speculation into something more concrete. Henry Daniels, fragile, took the stand on day 21. He admitted to owing money, to hands reaching into his life he could not push away. He told the jury Claire had feared for their children, that she begged him to tell someone. He said he believed now that their disappearances were not random, that perhaps people he trusted had betrayed that trust under debt, under obligation. He wept. The courtroom was silent. Not for drama, but for recognition. A man overwhelmed by what guilt, what fear, what duty can do over time. By the close of testimony, the jury had heard enough for some to believe, others to doubt. The judge reminded them of reasonable doubt, of the burden of proof. Broken Elm waited. The jury deliberated for 3 days. During that time, Broken Elm held its breath. Local papers printed obituaries of innocence and guilt in speculative terms. Community centers hosted meetings. Families prayed. Finch visited the Daniels property, now overgrown, knowing that whatever happened next, the truth, or the version of it the law could affirm, was about to reshape lives. When the verdict came, the courtroom was packed. Knox Mercer was found guilty on 2 counts, of accessory to wrongful disposal of human remains, though no bodies were recovered, and of conspiracy to conceal evidence. The judge remarked that while the disappearance of the triplets could not be proven beyond doubt in every detail, the accumulation of material, testimonial, and forensic threads made a pattern undeniable. Sentencing was delayed, appeals expected. Henry Daniels, though never charged with abduction or killing, was found responsible in civil proceedings for concealment and obstruction. His financial collapse was public. Claire Daniels remained missing, in law as in memory. No remains ever identified, no confession ever confirming her fate. Yet the verdict acknowledged her suffering and the weight of those who carried her absence. The community's reaction was mixed. For many of those who had held vigil, who had watched Finch and Theo patiently gather fragments, the verdict was vindication. For others, it was a painful reminder that truth does not always come clean. Some families suffered collateral damage, reputations stained, doors closed, friendships broken. Broken Elm Street, once quiet, became a site of storytelling, tours, published articles, podcasts. A small plaque was erected near number 17. In memory of Anna Beth Carl Daniels, not a marker of remains, but of remembrance. Finch kept working. She lobbied for local cold case funding, helped set up a forensic archive so that evidence would not degrade again. Theo Park published a long-form book. Mary Ann Daniels continued seeking closure. She organized goes-to-counseling groups, helped other families with missing children, and Henry Daniels, declining in health, spoke rarely, but sometimes in public, apologizing for what he knew, or thought he should have known. The mystery was not resolved in every detail. How exactly the babies perished, if they did, where their remains lie, who else was involved.